Part number 190 from the 1920s in a regal red. Hi! If you want even more Meccano goodness, why don't you check out my Patreon channel? And please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I post updates in the community section, not only for this week's Patreon build, but also for what I'm currently working on. Thank you, and back to the build. And welcome back to the second of the crane multi-kit builds. This one, as the title might have suggested, is for a foundry yard crane. Looking back in this video, I'm really not happy about the lighting, to the point of nearly refilming the video. But, and this is the part of the learning curve of life, at times we should embrace the imperfections, because life is never perfect. In fact, this light is awful, and I can hear the voice at the back of my head say, "Get over it." I try with the videos to do some research, come up with some history about the subject. I have no idea what class or type of crane this is. So please, if you know, leave a comment below. The need of cranes in foundries happened in the Industrial Revolution, as larger volumes of steel and iron were being created. The need to move them safely and reducing the risks of spillage, in turn causing harm to workers as well as wasting the metal, became more important. I think this crane is for lifting the crucible from the furnace, as it pivots around its base with a very limited movement, which would lead me to think that it's a small foundry. The construction begins with the base, on which the whole crane pivots. Then the task of constructing the tower that supports the jib. And what a task this was. I have Mark I Shrek fingers, and they don't like tight spaces, of which this model is a perfect example. Smaller foundries that use the crucible method are commonly classified into one of three groups. That is done by the method of removing the metal from the crucible. They are tilting, lift out, and bail out. I'm guessing this is a lift out. Large works like the one in my hometown of Consett seem to use gantry cranes to move crucibles around. And while that makes sense, it also comes with other hazards and dangers attached. A crucible is designed to take temperatures of around 1500 degrees centigrade, and the thought of the health and safety involved in moving several tons of molten metal must be a nightmare. My mother was telling me of a time in the 1950s when she'd visited her brother in Stoke-on-Trent. Heading back late one night from the pottery, where he was a master potter, they walked along the Trent and Mersey Canal. Flanked on either side was a Shelton bar, steel and iron works. The only light was from the lights of the works, casting shadows on the towpath and reflecting eerily on the surface of the still water. She told me how she stood and watched as overhead, incandescent with heat, travelled crucibles from one part of the works to another, slung beneath the cranes, lit by the lights of the cabs and the sinister glow of the slung cargo. Similar crucibles are dotted around my hometown still, relics of a long dead monster that both made and then destroyed the town. These ones sit on top of their railway carriages, parked alongside roads and cycle tracks as landmarks, slowly being claimed by nature as small plants and small trees struggle to vie against the graffiti to cover the wagons. As generation after generation of young person applies their own mark to the sides of these metal dinosaurs from a long lost age. In some places the rail track is still embedded in the concrete of the old site, almost as a silent witness to what once had happened. lest we forget the origin of our town high up in the hills, a history dating back to the early 17th century after German cutlers and sword makers settled here. So much of this engineering history is owing to the discovery of coal, iron ore and limestone in close proximity to each other. And so was Concept's downfall, as the iron ore turned out to be a smaller amount than hoped. Linked with Thomas Bessemer's process of steel manufacture, Concept ceased to be Great Britain's centre of steel production, and it moved to Sheffield, leaving the town to produce high-grade steel until its closure in 1980. But Concept has left its mark in this country in other ways. The next time you visit Blackpool, check the tower. Concept is stamped in the metal from which the tower is made. And so, at last, this tower also comes to completion. The lattice work makes for easy construction. The flange plate that makes the front of the crane allows for a good anchoring point for the gears. But at the back, the use of 2 3-hole perforated strips overlapped by 1 hole to bridge the gap seems to be a poor design. The narrow strips are very difficult to secure tightly due to their lack of mass, leading to them coming out of true. This led to the gear mechanism not operating correctly at times. As the kit comes with limited parts, this was the only method that I think Meccano had to solve this problem. Either that or issue another number 5 perforated strip for use on this crane only. And as some of the more eagle-eyed of you may have noticed, I used a zinc-coated one on the back of the crane. My mother has a saying, put it AW, AY, away. I hate it when it comes back to bite me. Yes, it wasn't put away, but sat on my desk for some reason that I can't remember. I found it interesting looking at the evolution of these videos. This is the second one I filmed at the beginning of 2020. And as I said at the beginning, I was, and still are, learning about lighting. This had been one of my stumbling blocks during the process. At the time of writing the script for this video in 2021, I have, at last, brought the correct equipment. And the build for the cement lorry, railway breakdown wagon and delivery truck are the first videos to be filmed with it. Creation has its ups and downs, problems to solve and overcome, but I'm reminded about the Japanese concept wabi-sabi, or the philosophy of embracing imperfectionism. This is the opposite of what my father taught me. He would frequently not see the beauty of what he had made, but only see the mistakes. His belief was not to show what you can do until you have mastered the art of doing it. And while this channel has taken some time to get going, at this point I'm a year behind schedule, I will always show my failures. Because they are part of the journey to success. There is a saying where I live, it's good enough for pit work. There is a time when it is good enough. Learn the lessons as best you can. Like all skills, my build skills have improved over the last year. I can remember really struggling with this base, especially with the angle girders bolt onto the base of the tower. For all the issues of space on this model though, I remember it as being a fun model to build. The motor is not the original but a replacement from eBay, and I've had a lot of running problems with it in the last 12 months. It's ended with me stripping it to bits and cleaning the connections, then permanently soldering the wires in place. This helped a lot, but a problem with the connections and the battery box were the next headache. Finally, after that was solved, 3 volts from the battery box was barely enough to turn the motor. That was solved with the larger 4.5 volt box. The extra half a volt should be okay. The motor is not running for long periods of time, just enough to film. And as always, each build gets to a point where you have to solve the baby giraffe syndrome, or all wobble and no jelly. When I got Meccano as a young child, I had no idea of tightening up nuts and bolts, and for all my father's great points, he was not a man who would sit with his children and work with them. I would put things together, get them sort of done up, and wondered why the whole thing would sag to one side. My father's input was to buy the item, followed by, "Here, I got you this. Now use it." And this is no disrespect to my father. He was a great man, a degree in chemistry and a higher degree in maths. When he served in the RAF just post World War II, he built and serviced radar stations. At the time, we were still using the home chain system, or 1-to-1 scale Meccano sets. He would of course have been trained how to construct them and service them. Also, he was part of a unit that did this work, so not working alone. And more importantly, he was not 7. We all have our blind spots, and my father's was, if I can do it, you should be able to do it also. He also worked on first principles, and in most of his life that hadn't failed him. I held my father no malice for this. I was not an easy child. I had both dyslexia and dyspraxia, and in many ways was a huge disappointment for him at the time. The ability to fall over invisible logs and fail at every sport I tried upset him. The inability to understand and remember information caused real concern for him, as he couldn't see a future that he would want to live. But that's the point as a father. Your job is to support and nurture, to help your child grow and lead a great life of their choice. I found my path, serving nearly 20 years in the NHS, working in the ambulance service first, and then frontline mental health. Finally in therapy services, helping young children rebuild their lives. I've worked alongside heroes that deserve statues built for them. Not the path my father would have walked. I feel honoured to have done what I did, even at the cost that I paid for my mental health in the doing. One dark night in 2016, I got a phone call from my mother. She was having what looked like a heart attack. She had already called an ambulance. Arriving at the house at the same time, they got my mother stable, and I woke my father, who was sleeping in a different room. This shaken, scared, blurry old man watched in tears as the woman he loved was taken to hospital. As the ambulance left, I went to check on my father before following my mother to hospital, knowing that shock would be setting in, and for an 87-year-old man, that can be fatal. He stood in the kitchen, kettle boiling to make a cuppa. He thanked me for being there. He felt that he'd failed his wife, our mother, for not knowing she'd taken ill. His comment to me was, "I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't have known what to do. I'm so proud of you." It was a bittersweet moment seeing my father old, vulnerable and scared. Knowing that 20 years of training and service allows me to function. That one of the flip sides to my problems is that I thrive in situations of high stress. My brain can work and function when others shut down with cognitive overload. That my father was proud of me still brings tears. And the man who never showed overt affection to his sons hugged me before I left. Okay, I have no idea what I'm getting up and down to get. As these are sped up, I don't know how long I'm gone for. Don't seem to be coming back to the table with new parts. I might be cooking something, but when I cook, I use my phone as a timer, and that's sitting on the right hand side of the screen, untouched. Probably cat related. Whatever it is, It's lazy-arsed editing. And at last the jib. This is a fixed jib, with the purpose of lifting the crucible clear from the furnace and then emptying it into either a mould or into a torpedo. No, not the device that sinks ships. Even though that could be a bad idea. The torpedo is a device to transport steel to other areas within the works, with giant torpedo ladle cars called TLCs moving the molten metal. In 1975, one of these TLCs exploded at Scunthorpe Works. The explosion claimed 11 lives and became known as the Queen Victoria blast furnace disaster. While this crane would be used in a refractory furnace, not a blast furnace, where air is forced through the molten metal, the above accident is worthy of note. The torpedo was loaded with 175 tons of molten steel, and around 3/4 of an hour later the order was given to the train driver to shunt the torpedo. At that point an explosion took place. Around 90 tons of metal was ejected from the TLC, carrying with it the lining of the torpedo. Molten metal and red-hot brick rained down, covering a large area. The exhaust ventilation hood of the carriage was blown vertically upwards through the roof of the building. The iron runner spout, over 1 ton in weight, was later found on top of the roof on the opposite side of the building. 4 men died immediately, with another 15 taken to hospital with their injuries. Sadly, the disaster would take another 7 men. The courage of the workers who stayed at their posts, did what they could to control the situation, is beyond my comprehension. And finally, the home stretch for the build. And this is where I come back to the learning curve that is any new skill. I have since learned about in-frame and camera positions. I have learned in editing the ability to scale the shot to fit the screen. Lighting. Oh, lighting, the bane of my life at this point. Sorry, but those lessons are still being learned, and they do improve in the videos to come. Looking back at this build, I have, as my father would have said, you've progressed a little, but there's still improvement to make.